During World War II, women were a pivotal part of many different armies. They had important jobs such as aircraft pilots and performed many of the roles that men had been called up to serve and fight did. Inside of Britain, women became part of the Land Army, a collection of women who kept the nation fed, and they also became munitionettes again, working inside of factories producing armaments for the war effort. But inside of other countries, women were accepted into military service and in roles directly on the front line. Particularly inside of the Soviet Union, women were permitted to fight for their nation and country, and they were thrust into the heart of fighting against the German army. Female snipers were found inside of cities such as Stalingrad, and many racked up large kill counts, and also women fought inside of partisan resistance groups, and even teenage girls picked up arms to oppose the German occupation of their country and lands. But if captured, these women and young girls often faced the most serious of punishments at the hands of the Germans, who executed them rather quickly and brutally. Many women were shot on sight after their capture, but why did the German soldiers shoot female soldiers immediately after their capture? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Now, inside of Nazi Germany and the German armed forces, they hated the idea and thought of female soldiers and women fighting on the battlefield, especially against them. Hitler's policies for women were aimed at keeping them in the household and raising children for the Third Reich, and they viewed female Soviet soldiers as a backwards and barbaric policy of Stalin's communist society, which was the Nazis' direct enemy. Because of this, they viewed female soldiers in the same eyes as Soviet commissars or political leaders, and with this they believed that the female soldiers needed executing and shooting immediately. It was seen as the lowest of the low inside of Germany, and many women who were discovered in Soviet army uniform were given torturous ordeals, and they were also executed quickly. The German army, not just the Nazis, also believed this, as the commander of the Fourth Army, when Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, began, Gunther von Kluge, ordered his men that all women who were found in Soviet army uniform were to be shot straight away, adding that the women soldiers were a terrible element of Bolshevism, and he also ordered his men to carry out atrocities against their captives. Officers and commanders within the German army gave out instructions as to also how to deal with women if they were captured. As mentioned, they were dealt with in accordance with the Commissar order, which Hitler had given, saying that Soviet commissars, political soldiers, would be executed immediately, and soldiers were encouraged to do this straight away. They were not given any chance to defend themselves in front of a court-martial. They were told to just kneel, and they were then shot in the head by a soldier, usually with his pistol. The women were not given a firing squad, which was said to have been a military execution, and they were shot by a single soldier, and they were not given a chance to spend the rest of the war inside a prisoner of war or concentration camp. Some women were later executed by hanging in front of many members of the public, being strung up from trees, and their remains were left out to send a clear message to other people not to fight the Germans, especially if they were women. Despite not being a Soviet Red Army soldier, but a partisan, Lepa Radic, a young 17-year-old communist girl, was executed in front of a huge crowd in this manner, and she was publicly executed to deter others from fighting against the Nazis and thus joining the resistance. There were many different roles that women found inside of the Soviet military. There were a group of female aviators who trained as pilots, and there was to begin with no formal limit for women to serve inside the Soviet armed forces. Women were discouraged and turned away from fighting the Nazi enemy to begin with, but this did change after the launching of Operation Barbarossa, as the Red Army lost thousands of soldiers very quickly. The huge losses led to Joseph Stalin accepting that women did have a place on the battlefield, and his country was the first to allow female pilots to fly combat missions, and there were regiments of female pilots who flew roughly 30,000 combat sorties during the war, and many women achieved the highest Soviet accolades and medals for their bravery. Specifically, there was the 46th Taman Guard, Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, which became colloquially known as the Night Witches. These women flew themselves around 24,000 missions, and from their biplanes, which were considered old and rather outdated, they attacked the Germans, dropping their payloads of bombs onto the enemy. They were incredibly feared and notorious against their enemy, as the night witches would fly to a high altitude, then disengage and switch off their engine, and would then glide to the bombing altitude and target in silence, and drop their bombs, causing huge devastation, before they then quickly flew out the area. For the Germans, they were like ghosts who were striking. There was also the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, which was the first to take part in combat involving the 3 female regiments, and they conducted over 4,000 combat missions themselves. The 125th Guards Bomber Aviation Regiment were commanded by a woman, Marina Rashkova, and they flew bomber aircraft and dropped roughly 1,000 tons of bombs onto Axis forces from their planes. But mostly inside the Red Army, women took up positions on the front line. Women did replace soldiers in the second line of defence who had died fighting the ferocity of the German army, and lots of these women were trained to administer aid, and they worked also as nurses in aid stations. They also took up anti-aircraft positions, and this was rather safer than being thrust directly onto the front line. Hundreds of thousands of women did serve inside the army, and one of the most infamous roles that they had was as snipers, crawling through ruined towns, looking for high-value targets. Some women achieved huge kill counts inside cities such as Leningrad and Stalingrad, hiding in the shadows and waiting all day long, sometimes even many days for a target. Female snipers, roughly 2,500 of them, fought against the Germans, and roughly 500 of them did survive the war. Their collective kill counts was roughly 11,000, including even some Nazi generals, and Lyudmila Pavlyuchenko was one of the most deadly snipers in history, achieving 309 confirmed kills. But many, if captured, were immediately shot and executed if they fell into enemy hands. Women in local areas were encouraged to take part in resistance on a local level, behind enemy lines inside of occupied lands. As mentioned earlier, even teenage girls picked up arms to fight their enemy, but they were dealt with roughly if captured. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya was only 18 years old when she joined the partisans, and she was seized by the Nazis as part of a combat group who were conducting a mission near to the village of Petrushevo. Zoya was brutally tortured and beaten for information, but she gave nothing away. She attempted to escape from prison and even shot at one of her captors, but after recapture, she was then stripped, beaten, and given 200 lashes, and her body was burned. She was paraded throughout a village with a board around her neck that said, "House burner." Her final words were, "You hang me now, but I'm not alone. There are 200 million of us. You can't hang us all. They will avenge me." She was then executed on the gallows, and her body was mutilated and was left up for weeks as a horrific message for people not to fight. Even Stalin noticed her story and said she was the people's heroine. He had by this point fully accepted women into the conflict and saw their value in fighting. But women played an important role in the Second World War inside the Soviet armed forces, and there were roughly 800,000 women who served in the military. But as mentioned throughout, if they fell into the hands of the German enemy, then they faced a horrific ordeal and an immediate execution. There are many images of women having been captured by the Wehrmacht, and they look truly terrified in these photographs, but it's fair to say that probably within minutes of these being taken, then these female soldiers were shot dead. It was an ideological execution, that the Germans believed women should be nowhere near the battlefield, and they thought that the use of them in a military capacity was a policy of the enemy that they truly despised. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.